I'm Hayley. I'm one of the regional ministers in the South Wales Baptist Association, and my remit is kind of mission and enabling mission. And in terms of digital content, I've been one of the people that gets thousands of views on YouTube, and also wakes up on a Monday morning and sees the video that I really wanted to have an impact only getting one view. So that's why I'm here to kind of talk about what to say. And I just want to start by asking forgiveness. Many of you may have been to theological college and learnt how to preach the ideal, perfect sermon. And as this is being recorded, then those are great, but sometimes we live in a different time. And this has caused us to look at a different time. So I want us to look at particularly how we address content, what to say, and how to say it in a digital world. And the first thing we need to look at is our platforms and audiences. And this is key to when we're thinking about online content. Now, some of you may be already cowering the fact that I've used audiences instead of congregation. And that's because when you view something online, it is very much more like an audience. And you need to be thinking about who you are prepping for. As Carl's alluded to, before maybe our sermons, we just focused on those within our congregation, and maybe one or two that pitched up to the church expecting a sermon. And now our content is online for everyone to see. And that gives us an amazing opportunity to share the good news of Jesus Christ. I'm always reminded of a missionary when reporting came back from Africa. And he said the problem was that we went to give them the bread of life, but they choked on the packaging. And we need to be culturally relevant about how we present the bread of life. And so that's what we're going to think about today, contextualizing our sermons, our message, and that starts with our platforms and audiences. One small note on social media that I just want to get out of the way. Hannah, if you go on the South Wales Baptist Association website and Vimeo channel, Hannah's done a brilliant thing about using social media. Please do check that out. But when you put your content on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and people share it, the whole point is social media is social. It is not a notice board. And so when you share it, get your congregation members, you yourself, share your content and say why you're sharing it. Why is it social? Why is it important to you to share? Those are the hooks that get people viewing. And now, excuse me, sorry. When we look at views, I don't know about you, but I've been excited by how many people have viewed my content over the past year. And that's really good. Views are amazing because they make us feel good. It's always good to see that number of views clock up. But it's not always as it seems. And the average length of a YouTube video is 11.7 minutes. 11.7 minutes is the average view of a YouTube video. And people's retention is even less than that. And dare I say it, people in your congregation's retention is even less than that. And so therefore we need to look at our platforms and audiences to work out our timings and what we're doing. So you may be at the point of producing your Sunday services online and sharing that via your social media. And that's really, really important. So you may say, well, Hayley, I'm not interested in changing the world. I just want to change the lives of those that God's already given me contact with. And that's fantastic. And therefore, something like YouTube works really well. Facebook works really well. But if you want to go a bit further into those on the fringes, maybe of your church, maybe they've come along in the past to your parent and toddler group, your coffee mornings, and they're peering in, then YouTube, Twitter, Instagram are great, but people are like your shop window. But when you're producing content for these, you have to understand that people scroll through and they need something that captures them, that gets them in their scrolling. And so you just need to think about what you're doing. So if you're producing a YouTube video, you're really looking for that ideal golden 11 minutes. Facebook, you're looking at probably having a 4-minute content because people scroll and you want it to stop long enough for people to capture in. Twitter, you get 1 minute 20, 1 minute 20 seconds to make an impact. Instagram, you get 60 seconds. And TikTok, I say TikTok because I use TikTok quite a lot, but purely for personal. I'm yet to find a way of sharing my faith on TikTok apart from just being an idiot. And so, but these are platforms that different generations are using, and they're ways in which we can whet people's appetite for the gospel. And so when you come to prepare, you need to be thinking, what platform am I putting this out on? If I'm putting it out on Facebook, then the key thing needs to be in the first 4 minutes. If I'm putting it out on Twitter, I need something that is 1 minute, 20 seconds, and so forth. Am I putting this out for everyone to see, and therefore there's no assumed Christian knowledge at all? Or is this just for my congregation? And they're things that we would often think about in traditional church as well. So they're the kind of different settings you've got. Now, this question always comes up, and I just want to name it and address it. People often say to me, but if you're producing something for social media on a digital platform, and it's all about audience, it's all about views, is it really preaching? Well, the short answer is yes. Yes, it is. Of course it is. It's sharing the good news of the gospel. The reality is the church has to adjust to the way it communicates the gospel in order to reach new people. We are not changing the fundamental truths of the good news of Jesus Christ. We're just changing the methods in which we share them. So planning what to say. Well, what you need to do is get a main point. Now, traditionally, we've maybe focused on a 3-point sermon, for example. And that's a good place to start. But it's interesting to know that most people will watch 3 consecutive short videos rather than one long one. So if you want to make a larger point, don't do that in one 20-minute stretch. Think about how you can encapsulate all those messages in short videos. Get your main point across. Think about what you're sharing. Connection is also really key when we're looking at digital ways of preaching, because connection is what hooks people in. What is it personally about you? What is it personally about a situation in the world? Get that connection. Sharing something of yourself is really key to social media and sharing. Images. Now, don't get me wrong, I love preaching. I would say that preaching traditionally in the pulpit is one of what God called me to do. But if I'm really honest, people don't really want to look at me for 20 to 30 minutes in a pulpit. They're probably thinking about their shopping list or what they were going to have for lunch. That's just a reality. And when you're looking at digital ways of sharing a message, it's much harder to keep retention, because in church world, people, or hopefully they didn't do this to you, people didn't get up and walk out if they got bored. But people would skip to another channel. People would go to another video content. And so you've got to think of what imagery you're using. And Andy will go into that next week about how you look at the images. But your images need to back up that main point. My other thing is, what are people taking home? What are you wanting the main crux of this message to be? Now, bearing in mind that most people that you maybe want to attract, you want to view your content, may not be committed Christians. And so therefore, the main point for me, if I'm talking to a non-Christian, the main point I want them to get across is that God loves them. God's grace is for them. And there's nothing they can do to earn it. There's nothing they can do to lose it. And that's the main point. And so we need to think about that. What's the main point that people are taking home? Now, they don't want to remember all the colours that Joseph had on his raincoat, but they might want to know about Jesus's love. So you've got to think, what are you spending your time investing in? What are people going to go home thinking about? In a nutshell, I do this all the time. What can you say if you look at some of the biggest vloggers and YouTubers and social media influencers? Often they will say what they're going to tell you about in the first 2 minutes. So often we might have done this traditionally in preaching. We might have gone, today I'm going to talk you through, these are the main points, and then go into them. Do that on your content as well. Today we're going to be exploring, the grace of God and what that means for you. Give a little summary so people are hooked in. It's in your nutshell. If you had to summarize your message, your content into 1 minute, what would it be? And then, of course, a minute's not enough. 11 minutes isn't enough to attract discipleship. Dare I say it, a 20-minute sermon isn't enough to entice or encourage discipleship either. It's about our whole life. So in planning what to say, you also need to plan your follow-up. How are we going to disciple people through this message? This message should inspire, this message should encourage, this message should challenge. But how are we building the social content on the back of that to encourage discipleship, for people to go deeper? Forgive me if I'm rushing through some of this. That's because it's always weird just talking to a camera. I much like to see your faces. But do remember to keep putting stuff in the chat or thinking, and we'll do some pondering and questioning and answers at the end. So you've planned what to say. How on earth do you say it? Well, storytelling is key. Absolutely key. Look at the teachings of Jesus. Jesus told stories. He told stories to challenge, to inspire, to annoy. Sometimes I think Jesus was telling his stories with his tongue firmly in his cheek. He was doing it to entice people, entice conversation, and that's what we need to be doing as well. But we don't need to do that just by staring at our camera. We can do that in different ways. What will make people stop? Now, you may want to tell the story, you may want to preach by inviting people around your dining room table, inviting people on your sofa for a coffee as you chat through something. You might want to use creative forms. Several years ago, I did a YouTube video which was a cardboard testimony that shared a message, a gospel message, without saying any words. But through really, so there's different methods. And I would implore you, I'd encourage you to try all those different methods. Maybe it's poetry, maybe it's a reflection. Don't just think people want to look at you on the camera. Obviously they do, you're beautiful, there's no other way. But for me, people don't just want to look at my ugly mug for 20 minutes or 11 minutes. The style. Find a style that suits you. This is important because actually at the heart of preaching the gospel needs to be integrity. That's the whole point. It needs to be authentic. It needs to be you. It needs to come from your heart and your love of Jesus. It's pointless me telling you this is a style that will work, because my style won't necessarily work for you. Find something that's true to yourself and share out of that. If that's inviting people into your living room for a sermon on the sofa with a cup of coffee, if that's reflecting as you go for a walk, if that's speaking over images, find a style that is true to who you are. Because let's face it, there's nothing worse than projecting a certain image online, and then when people ask you more, when people want to go deeper, your style is very contradictory to what you've presented. And the pace of that is the same, but allow the story to set the pace. If you're speaking from Psalm 23, you're not going to rush through that. You're not going to want to do that really fast pace. You want to take some time. There are other things where you might think, actually, this is a fast-paced kind of action part of scripture. I always think of the Old Testament being like Lord of the Rings in that sense of some of the scenery and the battles that it faces. I always think of Elijah being a bit of a Gandalf character. So there's a drama in that you want to come across. And again, timings, we said 11 minutes is key, but there needs to be those support resources. If you're making a main point, don't wait till the end of your video to do it. You almost need to have a main point, and everything within your content feeds into that. So whether someone's watched it for a minute, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, they know the main point. But that doesn't mean you need to repeat the same thing over and over again. It's just different ways of telling it. And again, I would always encourage to have the support material there. So often if you put something out online, it's good to do the whole, what do you think about this? I know that's really scary, isn't it, for us preachers, for us pastors, to put something out there and say, what do you think? What are you taking home from this? This is how the grace of God moves here, but how does it move for you? Encourage that discipleship through it. And that's why the digital content, preaching traditionally, isn't the main thing. The main thing is the discipleship in our everyday lives, and that comes through community. That can be done online, of course it can. So your sermon, your digital content should encourage people to want to go deeper into the story. So let's think about this. Let's think about John chapter 4, verse 1 to 26. It's that really famous, wonderful part, famous in Christian circles at least, where Jesus talks to the woman at the well. How would you present that message for social media? How would you present that to an audience that are viewing your church as a shop window, that maybe come along to your parent and toddler group when it used to meet, and they're just peering on, they like your Facebook page because they want to know when it's starting up again? And so how would you communicate that message? You want something that is fruitful for the church, that inspires them, that encourages them, that engages them, but you also want it to be accessible to those seeking. Just take 2 minutes now. What images come to mind in that story? Forgive me, I'm assuming you know this story. If not, you can quickly Google it on your phone. What images come to mind when you think of the woman at the well? What main point from that do you want to get across? Is it the fact that the woman has many husbands, or is it the grace of God? How do you think you could tell this story and get people's attention? When people are scrolling through Facebook at 8 o'clock at night, 6 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, if they're doing night feeds or just got COVID insomnia, what's going to make them stop? What's going to look different? What resources might you need to put in place to support discipleship through that story? If it was me, this is the video I would use. This isn't one of my own videos because I'm also humble, but this is a way of telling that story.
I am a woman of no distinction, of little importance. I am a woman of no reputation save that which is bad. You whisper as I pass by and cast judgmental glances, though you don't really take the time to look at me or even get to know me. For to be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known. And Otherwise, what's the point in doing either one of them in the first place? I want to be known. I want someone to look at my face and not just see 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and 2 ears, but to see all that I am and could be, all my hopes, loves, and fears. But that's too much to hope for, to wish for, or pray for, so I don't, not anymore. Now I keep to myself, and by that I mean the pain that keeps me in my own private jail, the pain that's brought me here at midday to this well. To ask for a drink is no big request, but to ask it of me, a woman unclean, ashamed, used and abused, an outcast, a failure, a disappointment, a sinner, no drink passing from these hands to your lips could ever be refreshing, only condemning, as I'm sure you condemn me now, but you don't. You're a man of no distinction, though of the utmost importance, a man with little reputation, at least so far. You whisper and tell me to my face what all those glances have been about, and you take the time to really look at me, but don't need to get to know me, for to be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known, and you know me. You actually know me, all of me and everything about me, every thought inside and hair on top of my head, every hurt stored up, every hope, every dread, my past and my future, all I am and could be. You tell me everything. You tell me about me. And that which is spoken by another would bring hate and condemnation. Coming from you brings love, grace, mercy, hope, and salvation. I've heard of one to come who would save a wretch like me, and here in my presence you say, I am he. To be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known. And I just met you, but I love you. I don't know you, but I want to get to. Let me run back to town. This is way too much for just me. There are others, brothers, sisters, lovers, haters, the good and the bad, sinners and saints, who should hear what you've told me, who should see what you've shown me, who should taste what you gave me, who should feel how you forgave me. For to be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known. And they all need this too. We all do need it for our own.
That for me is one of the most powerful sermons I've ever heard. To be known is to be loved. There wasn't some great exegesis or some hermeneutical or whatever the theological words are. That's not my bag. There are great people that have thought of that. But that on social media, followed by a link of, do you want to be known, to a site that talks about the grace of Jesus. That linked to another video of you maybe around your coffee table exploring the deeper theology for those that want to go further. That in a Sunday setting where you then ask committed Christians, well, if you've known that love, if you've known that grace, what's your reaction? Do you go running to the people? Do you go running in the streets so that they hear that? There's challenge, there's truth. 1 minute long. It's as powerful for me as a 30-minute detailed theology. It entices, it shares the gospel, but it's not enough on its own. I think it's wonderful, but of course, I know a much bigger story as well. And so when you put that on social media, you then have to follow it up. But for me, I'd encourage you with digital content to get creative. Use those phrases that spark the passion of retelling the gospel. Do it in a way that's unique to you, in your style. I can't guarantee you that that means that you will get thousands of hits on YouTube. I can't guarantee you that thousands will come to know Jesus. But what I can do is assure you that a message as powerful as that, which you've all got the giftings to do, will speak to someone, will speak to one person, will penetrate in their heart and their want to know more. And that's what the digital content for me is about. And so when we plan about what to say and how to say it, think about who your audience is and how to encourage and disciple them in their faith. So I've rattled on for a really long time there, and I know chat was coming up in the box, so I'm just gonna stop and have some coffee for a moment.
Super. Oh, Hayley, that was amazing. That was so good. Really, really inspiring. I'm going to do a couple of comments just about that video, and then I can ask the other ones. First question is from Steve saying, how long does something like that take to put together?
It really does depend on you. And I know Andy will talk about the filming and editing and that next week. But for me, when I'm writing, I suppose it sometimes takes as much as it is for you to write a sermon. That creativity. If you're anything like me, I've never been one to go, right, Monday between 9 to 10 is my sermon writing time, and that's when I'm going to be creative. It's inspired by those around you. So I would think creative content, the written stuff, takes as long as it would normally take you to prepare a sermon.
And I suppose kind of for me personally, to add to that as well, is it gets easier each time, like from the technical point. Was there a particular target audience in mind for that video?
I didn't produce that video. I didn't make that video. I just love it. I think the point is, for me, is the target audience. It was to share that gospel story. It was to share the grace of Jesus. Now, I would say the target audience for that is almost those on the fringes of the church, those people that you may know, your non-Christian mates. But also, I've been in pastoral ministry for a few years. Sometimes people in the church need to hear that story. You know, the spoken word is a powerful thing. And for me, I know that video was edited in a certain way of words, and I get that. But taking that aside, those words, just the script of that is powerful enough.
Yeah.
It's about, you know, the script. You could have, Andy may come in on this, you can have the best, well-edited video in the world. If the script, if the message is rubbish, it's not gonna stick. It's not gonna have an impact. It all starts with what you are saying.
Yeah. So a couple of questions that we had earlier on. Well, first one is a comment from Steve. This is reminding me to reread Communicating for a Change by Andy Stanley, which is a good on connecting with people in our speaking. So I did put the link in for the Amazon there. I think it sounds good, so I'm going to get that. Jonathan says, do you think that a deductive teaching style works better with online content rather than an inductive?
Yeah. I think the thing is, we kid ourselves in churches. Forgive me, you may be the world's best preacher, in which case everyone is hanging off your every word for 40 minutes, 30 minutes. I'm not that. And so I think everything in bite size is key. We do that, don't we? When we're working with our children and young people, we do education in bite size. Somehow when they get to adulthood, we think they can digest huge, big chunks. But I think that slowly steps build on a much bigger story.
And as well, how we consume social media, that we're not sitting and watching something on Facebook for 20 minutes necessarily. Actually, you're far more likely to get someone engaged with 4 5-minute videos rather than 1 20-minute video. I've been asked to video myself doing assemblies for a local primary school. Do you have any specific advice for this situation?
I think primary school, it's quite difficult. I always, with kids, do mess. You can't really do mess online. And I think for me, it's about integrity. So if you were doing that primary school lesson live, what would you want to say? So get that main point across, and then write your script around that, and then the filming content and how to film, I guess Andy and that we'll talk about. But in terms of content, in one sense, we're looking at what we do anyway. We're sharing those messages, we're sharing the good news. But the retention is slightly shorter than maybe what we would expect live. So just everything, shorten it right down. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect at this. When I've done stuff for Fuelcast, I always get the email back going, too long. So it's about editing and cutting down. And sometimes your process may be you have to write something longer to then really whittle it down and down and down. And I know people don't like watching themselves online, or some people don't, but I think it's really good sometimes to film yourself reading something, you know, doing your content, and then seeing how it comes across. You know, often I will film myself with a reflection, and then afterwards go, oh no, that didn't quite sound right. That didn't, the wording of that wasn't in the right order. And so sometimes we've just got to be disciplined in that.
Yeah, amazing. Sarah Jane said, do you need a special license to share something from places like YouTube?
I think if you show it live, you don't have to, do you? I'm looking at Carl. I don't, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to copy some information. So there is actually some pretty good information that's coming from the communications team at Baptist House, Baptist Together, on exactly this issue. And I'm just trying and failing to copy it into the chat box. But I think it's because it's too many characters. What I'll try and do, Sarah, is I've got your email address, so I'll email you. But yes, there are specific licenses that you need to use certain material from YouTube and to upload certain material to YouTube. It's slightly different for Zoom. YouTube have got various copyright licenses that they personally have bought, which Zoom haven't. So you actually need additional license to use some video content you've downloaded from the internet onto Zoom. It also depends on where you've sourced that content. So I think that is the primary key for that. Is I'll send you an email, but there's particularly an online license. CCL do a online license, and that's the one that a church needs. It's not very expensive. It's about 40 quid for a year or something like that. But that is the license that you need to upload stuff to particularly to YouTube, if that's the channel that you're using. Hannah's just quickly messaged to say that for some reason her internet's knocked off, so I'm gonna take over if that's all right, just for a second, Hayley. So people were commenting on the video that you showed. It's worthwhile just having a little look at that. In effect, the flavour of the comments are that looks like a pretty high bar. How long would something like that take to film? I probably haven't got the expertise to do something that's like that. Is there any kind of reflections or comments you want to say back to those people that are seeing that video, recognizing the absolute beauty that it is, and then thinking, but not a chance for me? Yeah,
that's cool, and I totally get that. What I would encourage you to say is, I showed that video not because of the way it looks or how it's filmed, but because of the script. That was a really powerful script. Now, I think the video and editing, I know Andy's going to address next year, but don't be afraid. But also, you may not be great, but there's nothing to stop you from writing, planning a content and asking someone else to share it. You know, if you've got some people that are confident on camera that are able to do that, you know, we don't always have to do things ourselves. I think for me, producing on a digital content is about sharing, and sharing resources, sharing what we've got. So I would say for me, the point of that was the script was key of how we, you know, traditionally may have taken that message and made it a 3-point sermon for 20 minutes. And now actually what we're doing is we're saying, actually, how do we condense that? So it was the script I was looking at a bit more.
I want to echo that. Andy, feel free to unmute and chip in as well if you want to. But I think that's one of the when I was referring to steep learning curves at the beginning, that's been one of mine, particularly over this last year. So the way that we would normally preach to a congregation has got various different methods. Of course, there is deductive and inductive styles. There's far more narrative styles of preaching that we might use, and then there's kind of the very systematic bullet point type of your 3 points all beginning with a letter P type of thing that Baptist preachers so apparently love. So we're all used to preaching, even to a congregation, in various different styles, depending on the passage that we're preaching from and the message that we're trying to get across to that particular audience. I think probably what I've learned over the last year is that for those who aren't used to being in church. I'm thinking of people who I've known who aren't Christians, friends from around and about, that somehow, and I don't know how, have come across videos that I've put online. So I haven't told them, but some way or somewhere they've, you know, it's come up in comment. Off we've been for a socially distanced walk, and they said, "Oh, I watched that video you put online," which initially I'd thought was just for churchy people, but there it is. It just shows that it spreads. The particular style I think that works well is far more of a narrative style. So, this is very kind of age old. It's nothing new. Imagine yourself as an Old Testament storyteller, telling the stories of God, sat around a campfire with a group of others. So that oral tradition that we all know is the kind of the root and foundation of our faith, where the story of God was passed on in that kind of round the campfire storytelling kind of a way that engages people. And you can imagine the storyteller and their mannerisms and the tone of their voice and the style of the language and how the story is told and how it builds and how it sometimes resolves and sometimes is left hanging. And you know all of this because you preach all of this. These are the Old Testament stories, right? That's just such an incredibly powerful method of getting a message across. And so I think probably what I've learned is that storytelling style that Hayley mentioned has been by far and away the most powerful method of getting. Last Sunday, I was asked to preach at my church, it's in Plymouth, who live stream like many of you do. And they live stream from the building. And it felt weird. So it's the first time in about a year I've stood behind a lectern and preached what I now call old school, if you see what I mean. Weirdly enough, the guys from the church have pulled various bits out of that sermon, which was a typical length of sermon, 25 minutes long, 30 minutes long sermon. And my first TikTok went up this morning, guys. Because the church has got a TikTok channel, I guess because it's trying to get its message across to that particular audience, that particular generation that uses TikTok. So they've pulled like 3 sentences out of this half hour's worth of sermon, which they consider to be kind of the main point, the message that Hayley was talking about. And it's now whacked out on TikTok to whoever watches it. I didn't even dance.
You can't be on TikTok without dancing.
Right.
One point there, Carl, on live streaming and filming content, I think it's really interesting to note that 7 out of 10 people prefer to watch online videos than live content. So that's really, really interesting. So before, and so we see this even with traditional kind of iPlayer, ITV Hub, all of those, people won't watch live TV, they'll watch it after the event. Now, that's really key for us as communicators, because often when we think of a sermon, we see a sermon in a context of worship. And depending on your church tradition, that might be sung worship. Now, I know it's easier to preach, isn't it, once the congregation are in that worshipful state and are ready to kind of receive the message. But actually, people are coming in cold. They're not having that build-up. And so although you may be live streaming and then putting up the recording of that afterwards as well so people can see it, people are less likely to watch a live stream content back rather than something that's produced solely for that medium. So I think when we eventually get back to our buildings, I want to encourage you to think about how you communicate in that way. If you just detract the sermon from its context, it gets a bit lost. And so you need to see things as an individual kind of package, if that makes sense.
That's helpful. There's a number of questions and comments coming in about licenses. Guys, what I'll do at the end of the webinar is I'll put up where you'll be able to find a recording of this. And if you look in the description on YouTube or Vimeo, wherever you go to, Hayley, if you can save that PowerPoint presentation as a PDF and send it over to me, I'll make it available. You can download it. And there'll be a link in the description on the webinar recording, so when you see it later. there was a question here. I don't know whether you've answered this or not, Hayley. What words of encouragement can you give to those who are reluctant to appear on camera? Hayley, you might want to answer that. Andy, do you want to chip on this as well? Because you're used to kind of filming a lot of people who aren't experienced on camera. So what words of encouragement can you offer to those who are reluctant to appear on camera?
I would say, don't worry. Like you are a child of God and you are gifted. People want to hear from you. The thing about social media, the thing about content is the thing that gets the main views, the thing that gets people moving on in their discipleship with Christ is you and your attractive faith. You've just got to believe that God's gifted you. Your preachers, you get up, maybe every Sunday morning traditionally, you've got this, you've nailed this. Putting it out there just gives a wider audience. Be yourself. I think that's the key. There's nothing worse, is there, than presenting two images. So be yourself. And actually, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. To just keep on keeping on would be my encouragement.
Well, Andy, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally relate to that. I mean, I much prefer being, this side of the camera or behind the camera than in front of it. So I can relate to that. I think what I personally find helpful is, one, if you feel you're well prepared and you feel passionate about the message that you're about to give. So you feel like you've got a good script. You feel like you've perhaps either memorized it, or you're confident using the teleprompter, or I think it's that sense of preparedness and passionate and a great sense of confidence and conviction in your message. That will come through. That will carry you through, I think. And of course, the obvious things like prayer. I think filmmaking ideally should be a team it should be something that we do as team. So it's a lot of pressure to be the best, to write well, to then have to film and frame really well, and to then have to edit really well. Now, some of us do all of that, and we have to do all of that ourselves. That's fine. But if you can develop team, I think that will really help you, because someone might specialize, they might be better at writing, and someone might be really better at editing. And so in filmmaking, you do have a team of specialists that collaborate, that work together. And I think for those that are feeling nervous about appearing on camera, if you've got, again, if you're part of a team, and there's someone with you who can pray for you and can encourage you and nod, then that helps as well. So I think for me, those are just some things that, as well as Hayley's mentioned about, having some self-confidence perhaps, and get rid of that whole comparison thing. We're forever comparing ourselves with it. Being true to who God has made us is really important, I think.
Well, there's another question here. How important is eye contact on video? I mean, that might be a question prompted because you talked about teleprompters, Andy. Hayley as well, you might want to kind of kick in. And if Hannah's in the room again, you might want to kick in on this one too. Next week, just to say, next week's webinar, we'll talk about hardware, if you see what I mean. So what camera you're using or what phone you're using, microphones. We can mention about teleprompters. Some of this stuff sounds massively technical and very expensive, and indeed it can be, but equally it doesn't necessarily have to be. So what we'll do next week is we'll talk in the webinar about things like teleprompters. We'll give you kind of a rough idea of where to get cheap ones from, and we'll talk about script software that goes with the teleprompter as well, most of them, and we'll talk about lights, and we'll talk about cameras, and we'll talk about microphones. So that's next week. that's going to be a proportion of next week. The most of next week is going to be a think about your setting and think about your lighting and think about how you're going to record the audio and all of the practical things that very simple things that Andy will talk to us about can make literally the world of difference to actually what you're producing. But just in terms of eye contact, it might be because people were thinking, how do you use eye contact to a camera if you're looking at a script that's next to the camera? I mean, you then spoke about teleprompters. I think that might be the train of thought. How important is eye contact on video, do you think?
I think it's different and it depends. So, and I suppose it depends how arty you want to be, how things. The thing is, again, it's social. People want to engage with you, and so I think it's really key in that sense. So when you would think about it as if you were in your pulpit on a Sunday, you wouldn't always just look down at a sheet of paper and read from that, would you? You'd engage. You'd do that. Now it is harder, I think, to engage sometimes just with a camera when you're on your own. But I could introduce you to a few congregations that don't engage at all. So it can be similar to what we're used to, but you just have to relate to who you are. But equally, don't get so set in stone that it worries you. And I think hopefully we'll talk about this next week, is you can always do off-cut kind of shoots and use imagery, so you're talking over. So if there's something really complex that you want to read it, nail the script, because that's key, and then find other ways to support it so it doesn't look dodgy, would be my advice.
There's 1,000 dodgy video clip bits that have been covered up by a little bit of a picture of a flower blowing in the breeze or whatever it may be. It all comes out and you think, what a great job they've done in that video. Now they're just stitching over all the rubbish bits. That's what's going on. There's someone here, guys. I don't know, Hayley. Hayley's local church minister as well as regional minister. I don't know where she's got the time, but she is. Someone said she's been asked to record something for a funeral for the first time. Any thoughts on recording something, conducting a funeral on video for the first time? Hayley?
Make it personal. This is, I mean, I think sometimes this is the tough stuff, isn't it, in these COVID times? So we, the real stuff, you want to do those things in person, of course you do. But just like you would do an in-person funeral, you make it personal. Be in a surrounding that is familiar to you. That may actually be the church. You may want to whack your camera in a church to do that. But make sure you're comfortable. Take your time and just speak from the heart like you would a normal funeral. If you're in the funeral service and they're projecting it, streaming it to other people, then just do the service as you would normally do it. Don't address the camera in that situation. Address those who are there. I think that's the only one occasion I will say that. Address those that are there and allow the live streaming. If there's no one there, then talk to the camera. I'm quite happy if you want to have a kind of personal chat about that and talk about circumstances. I'll whack my email in the chat and we'll have a, because there may be unique circumstances to that case, but if that makes sense.
Brilliant, thanks. Guys, we're coming to the end of our hour and I don't want to detain anyone longer than we kind of scheduled this for. It's been awesome.